There's a kind of pain that doesn't make any noise. It doesn't show up as a big fight or a breakdown or some moment you can look back at and say, okay, that's where everything fell apart. It shows up as nothing. You just go quiet inside. You keep doing everything you're supposed to do. You show up. You work. You come home. But somewhere along the way, something in you just switched off. And the scariest part is, you didn't even notice it happening. If that's hitting close to home right now, stay with me. Welcome back to the channel. My name is Harold. This is The Hidden Code, where we talk straight, real psychology to help men make sense of what they're going through in their relationships, in their heads, and in their everyday lives. No filler, no fake motivation. Just honest conversations about things most men never get to talk about out loud. Today, I want to share a story. And I think a lot of men watching this are going to feel like it was written about them. Not because it's some big dramatic story, but because it's quiet. Because it looks completely fine from the outside. And because the man in it had no idea how much of himself he'd lost until it was almost all gone. This isn't about pointing fingers at anyone. It's about seeing a pattern clearly so you stop spending years blaming yourself for something you never fully understood in the first place. A few weeks ago, I got a message from a viewer. We'll call him Marcus. He's 38 years old. He works at a shipping company. Nothing fancy, just a steady job he's been at for years. He owns a house. He's been with his partner, we'll call her Dana, us for 9 years, married for 6. They have 2 kids. From the outside, it looks like a life that's going pretty well. And honestly, Marcus would have said the same thing 2 years ago. He would have told you he had nothing to complain about, and that right there should tell you something. Because men who are actually doing fine don't usually need to remind themselves of that. Marcus wrote to me and said, I spent almost 10 years feeling like something was off with me, and I could never figure out what it was. I wasn't angry, I wasn't crying myself to sleep, I was just empty. Like I was showing up to my own life every single day, but the real me had already checked out a long time ago. He didn't write that like he was upset. He wrote it the way you talk about something you've thought about so many times you're not emotional about it anymore. Just calm, clear. Like a man who finally found the words for something he'd been carrying around for years without being able to say it. Marcus grew up pretty normally. His dad worked long hours. His mom was around more. Nothing extreme happened. No big story. He said in his 20s, he felt pretty good about himself. He had close friends. He had energy. He had things he cared about. He used to play football on weekends with a group of guys he'd known since school. He liked cooking. Nothing serious. Just messing around in the kitchen on a Sunday. He was the kind of guy who could walk into a room and feel comfortable. He wasn't the loudest person there, but he wasn't hiding either. He met Dana when he was 29. She was 26. And they worked near each other and started talking through a mutual friend. He said the early days were easy. She was fun to be around. She laughed at the same things he did. She was warm. She texted first sometimes. She seemed genuinely happy just spending time with him, not needing anything big or special, just him. Marcus said he remembered thinking, this feels easy. This feels right. That feeling didn't last as long as he expected. About a year in, he started noticing small things. Nothing he could really put his finger on at first. She'd get quiet after a perfectly good evening, and he wouldn't know why. She'd make a comment about something he did in a way that felt like a small dig, but wasn't quite enough to call out. He'd plan something for them, and she'd go along with it, but there was always this flatness to it, like it didn't quite land, like whatever he did was just slightly missing the mark. Marcus told himself it was just the honeymoon phase wearing off, that this was normal, that all couples go through this. So he did what most men do. He tried harder. When she said she felt like they didn't talk enough, he made more effort to talk. When she said he was on his phone too much, he put it down. When she said she wanted to go out more, he planned things. When she said she was tired of going out and just wanted to stay in, he stayed in. He was constantly adjusting, constantly reading the room, constantly trying to figure out what version of himself she needed that day. And here's the thing, it never worked. Not really. Every time he fixed one thing, something else came up. It was like trying to fill a bucket that had a hole in it. He'd pour everything in and check back the next day, and it was empty again. Marcus actually wrote down a list at some point because he said he felt like he was losing his mind. He needed to see it on paper. Year 1 together. She said she felt like they didn't have a real future plan. He sat down with her. They talked it through. Made a plan together. Done. Year 2. She said she was unhappy in the city they were living in. Too loud. Too expensive. She wanted something quieter. He looked into it. They moved. Done. Year 3. She said she wanted to get married, that she needed to know this was serious. He proposed. Planned the kind of wedding she wanted. Done. Year 4. She said she wanted a baby, that she felt like something was missing. They had their first child. Done. Year 5. She said she felt alone, that he wasn't present enough. He cut back on overtime. Started coming home earlier. Done. Year 6. She said she felt suffocated, that she needed more space. That one stopped him cold, because a year before that she said he was never around. And now he was too much. He sat with that for a long time, and something started to shift in him. Not anger, just a slow, quiet realization that something here didn't add up, that no matter what he did, the answer was always the same. Not enough. Wrong. Try again. Before we go deeper, I want you to just sit with this for a second. If this is sounding familiar, if you've lived some version of this, drop a comment with just one word. Enough. That's it. Just that word. Because saying it, even just typing it, matters. And if this channel is speaking to something you've been carrying around quietly, hit subscribe and join a community of men who are done suffering in silence and ready to actually understand what's been going on. Because in the next part of this story, we're going to look at where Marcus started to find the real answers. And once you see it, it's going to make a lot of things make sense. The moment things started to click for Marcus wasn't some big conversation or a fight that finally said everything out loud. It was a Saturday afternoon. Dana's mom, we'll call her Carol, had come to stay for a long weekend, and Marcus said within about 20 minutes of her arriving, he felt something he couldn't explain at the time. A kind of recognition, like he'd seen this before but didn't know where. Carol walked in, gave the kids a hug, looked around the kitchen and said, "Oh, you've still got those old cabinets." Not mean, not loud, just a quiet little comment that landed like a stone in still water. Then it was the drive over, too much traffic. Then the neighbor's dog that never stops barking. Then the weather. Then something Dana's sister had done 3 months ago that apparently still wasn't resolved. Marcus sat at the kitchen table watching all of this, and something clicked. Dana wasn't reacting to any of it. She wasn't rolling her eyes or trying to change the subject. She was just nodding, agreeing, adding to it, like this was completely normal, like this was just how a conversation goes. Later that night, after Carol had gone to bed, Marcus brought it up gently. He said something like, "Does your mom always kind of focus on the negative like that?" And Dana looked at him like he'd said something strange. She said, "That's just how she is. She's had a hard life." Marcus let it go, but he couldn't stop thinking about it. Over the next few months, he started paying attention in a different way. Not to Dana's complaints, he'd already spent years doing that, but to the pattern underneath them. And what he saw was this. And Dana had grown up watching her mother move through life like everything was a problem waiting to happen. Her dad had left when she was young. Not a dramatic exit, he just slowly became less present, less involved. And then one day he basically wasn't there anymore. And her mom never really recovered from that. She didn't fall apart visibly. She just went hard, closed off. And she taught Dana, not with words but with everything she did every day, that men let you down, that things don't work out, and that the smart thing to do is expect disappointment before it finds you. Marcus told me, I started realizing Dana didn't just have a pessimistic streak. She had been trained to see the world that way since she was a little kid, and I'd spent 6 years trying to show her a different version of reality, and she didn't trust it, because her whole life had taught her not to. That hit him hard, because it meant the problem was never the apartment or the city or the job or the baby or any of the things he'd busted himself trying to fix. Those were just the shapes her unhappiness took at different times. The unhappiness itself was already there before he came along, and if he disappeared tomorrow, it would still be there. It would just find something else to sit in. There's actually real science behind this. Studies on happiness have shown for years that roughly half of how happy a person feels in the long run comes down to genetics, the way their brain is wired. Some people naturally sit closer to positive. Others naturally sit closer to negative. And life events? The stuff we think matters so much, the house, the job, the relationship, those only account for about 10% of the difference. The rest comes from how a person processes things internally, how they talk to themselves, what they focus on, what they let go of, and what they hold on to. So when someone grows up in an environment that teaches them the world is unsafe and people can't be trusted and nothing good lasts, that doesn't just become a belief, it becomes the lens they see everything through. And you can't argue someone out of a lens they don't know they're wearing. You can't love someone into a different nervous system. Marcus had been trying to do exactly that for 6 years and wondering why nothing stuck. He also started to notice something else, something that felt uncomfortable to admit even to himself. In the early days, Dana had been different, not completely, but lighter. She laughed more easily. She was quicker to let small things go. She reached out first sometimes. She seemed, and this is the word Marcus used, she seemed genuinely grateful just to be there, and he'd taken that version of her as the real one, the baseline, the person he was committing to. But looking back, he started to wonder if what he'd seen in those early months was her best version, the one she pulled out when she was working to secure something, not fake exactly, but not fully real either. Because once the relationship was locked in, once there was a marriage and a house and kids and all the things that make leaving complicated, that lighter version slowly went away. And what was underneath it was someone whose natural resting state was dissatisfaction. Someone who felt more comfortable with tension than with peace. Someone who genuinely didn't know what to do with a calm, stable day because she'd never really had one growing up. Marcus said one of the strangest things he noticed was that their worst periods didn't always come when things were hard. Sometimes things would be going genuinely well. No big stress, no arguments. Kids were fine. Money was okay. And that's exactly when Dana would pick something up. Just an old argument she'd let sit. A comment someone had made weeks ago. A thing he'd forgotten to do that suddenly became proof of something bigger. He used to think it was bad timing. Now he understood it differently. When everything was calm, something in her got uncomfortable. Like calm wasn't safe. Like it meant she'd let her guard down. So she'd create friction just to feel like she was back on familiar ground. That's not a character flaw exactly. It's what happens when someone grows up in a house where calm meant something bad was coming, where peace was just the quiet before the next problem. You learn to trust the tension more than the stillness, and you carry that into every relationship you ever have. Before we move on, just check in with yourself for a second. If you felt this, if you've watched yourself try harder and harder and felt the ground getting further away, not closer, drop a comment with one word: pattern. Just that. Because in the last part of this, we're going to talk about what all of this actually cost Marcus. And the one thing that finally changed everything. And I'll tell you now, it wasn't something she did. By the time Marcus hit year 8, he said he barely felt like himself anymore. And he didn't mean that in some deep philosophical way. He meant it practically. The things that used to make him feel like him were just gone. He used to play football on weekends. That stopped because it was always a problem. He was gone too long, or he'd come home too tired, or it just wasn't the right day. He used to cook on Sundays, something he actually enjoyed. That stopped too. Too much mess, wrong ingredients, not what she felt like eating. He used to call his friends regularly. Those calls got shorter and then less frequent, and then almost never because afterwards there was always something to manage. A mood that had shifted while he was on the phone. A comment about how he always made time for other people. He wasn't asked to give those things up directly. That's the part that makes it hard to explain to someone who hasn't lived it. Nobody sat him down and said, "Stop doing the things you love." It happened slowly through 100 small moments where doing his own thing just cost more than it felt worth. So he stopped, one thing at a time, until the version of himself that existed before Dana was almost completely gone. He said, "I didn't notice it happening." That's the honest truth. I just kept making small adjustments and telling myself this is what you do in a relationship. You compromise, you show up, you put the other person first. But at some point that stopped being compromise and became just disappearing. And I didn't catch it until there was almost nothing left of me to catch. The guilt was the thing that kept him stuck longest. Because Marcus genuinely believed for years that this was his fault. That if he was just better, more patient, more present, more whatever it was that was missing, things would settle, that the right version of him would finally be enough. And that belief, that he was the problem, kept him working harder at something that had nothing to do with his effort. His friends noticed before he did. His older brother pulled him aside at a family thing about 2 years ago and said, "Mate, where have you gone?" Not in a dramatic way, just straight, like something he'd been wanting to say for a while. Marcus brushed it off at the time, told him everything was fine, but he drove home that night and sat in the car in the driveway for a long time before going inside, because he knew his brother was right and he didn't know what to do with that. The thing that actually shifted something in him wasn't a big conversation. It was a question. He'd started seeing a therapist on his own, quietly, almost embarrassed about it, like he was admitting defeat. And in one of the early sessions, his therapist asked him something simple. Was she happy before she met you? Marcus stopped. He thought about the things Dana had told him over the years, about her childhood, about her dad leaving, about the jobs she'd hated, the friendships that had fallen apart, the feeling she described of never quite fitting anywhere. No, she hadn't been happy. Not really. Not for a long time before him. Then the therapist asked, "Do you think you have the power to fix something that started long before you showed up?" And Marcus said he just sat there, because the honest answer was no. He'd always known that somewhere underneath everything, but hearing it asked out loud like that, plainly, no drama, it hit differently. If the answer was no, then what exactly had he been killing himself trying to do all these years? Her unhappiness wasn't caused by him. It wasn't about him. And no matter how hard he worked at it, it was never going to be solved by him. He was just the closest thing to aim it at, the current target, not the source. And if he wasn't the source, then he also wasn't the solution. That thought didn't make him feel like celebrating. It made him feel something quieter than that. Like something heavy he'd been carrying for a very long time had just been put down. And this is where we have to zoom out a little, because Marcus's story isn't rare. I hear versions of it constantly. The details change, but the shape is always the same. A man who tried everything, who adjusted and adapted, gave up pieces of himself one at a time, who believed for years that the problem was him, and who finally ran out of road trying to fix something that was never his to fix. Here's what the research tells us clearly. A person's baseline, the emotional place they naturally sit when life isn't pushing them hard in either direction, that's mostly set before you ever meet them. It comes from their genetics, from the house they grew up in, from what they were shown about how life works when they were young and still taking everything in. You cannot change someone's baseline by loving them harder. You cannot out-effort someone's nervous system. You can be the best version of yourself every single day, and if someone's inner world is set to find problems, it will find them. In you. In the house. In the kids. In the job. In the weekend plans. It will always find something, because finding something is how it stays alive. This is not about whether someone is a good person or a bad person. Dana isn't a villain in this story. She's someone who was shaped by things that happened to her before she had any say in the matter. But understanding that, really understanding it, doesn't mean you have to keep paying for it. Compassion for someone's history and responsibility for your own life are two things that can exist at the same time. The hardest truth in all of this is simple. You cannot make someone happy who doesn't have the tools to be happy inside themselves. Not with money, not with patience, not with effort, not with love. If those tools were never built in them, your job is not to build them. You are not a therapist. You are not a parent. You are a partner. And there's a real difference. Marcus is still in his marriage. But something changed. He stopped trying to manage her emotional state. He started doing some of the things he'd let go of. He called his brother more. He started cooking on Sundays again. Small things, but his things. He said, "I stopped waiting for her to be okay before I let myself be okay." That sounds simple, but it took me 8 years to get there. Dana is still the same. He says she probably always will be. But he's not drowning in it anymore. He's present for his kids. He's getting pieces of himself back. And he stopped carrying the guilt of being the reason for something he never caused. That lesson cost him nearly a decade. He hopes putting it into words saves someone else a few years of the same. Brother, if this landed, drop a comment with one word. Clarity. Just that one word. And if this channel is helping you make sense of things you've been sitting with quietly on your own, Subscribe and join a community of men who are done blaming themselves and ready to see things clearly. Protect your peace. Know what's yours to carry and what isn't. And stop shrinking yourself trying to fill a space that was never empty because of you.